I'm just shutting things now. I just closed about 25. Spotify, that can go. Teams.
Sorry, you had 25 tabs going on and you're wondering why the internet's slow.
My simple mind tells me that it only does stuff when you're clicking.
Well, look at that. You know that tab you had open that said download the internet? I think that might have been...
You're listening to the Offsite Podcast with Jason and Carlos, where we talk all things construction and technology.
Join us for discussions with industry leaders and insights into the latest trends in construction. Welcome back to the Offsite Podcast. Today we've got some big news to talk about in the world of commercial technology for construction projects. So, Carlos, there's no one better that I would want to be talking to about the super interesting and not boring at all world of software for contract management and construction. How are you, mate?
Rich words for someone that spends all day talking about Gantt charts.
The world is built on Gantt charts. There's nothing you can't do without a Gantt chart. Except have friends or something like that.
You can't build anyone without contracts, payments, and everything else too. So, it all goes in cycles. Hey.
If the world would be a better place if we did everything on a handshake, I think. But that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that doesn't seem risky at all. The old spit shake and crack on. Nice.
Yeah, that's how the mafia operated. They didn't have contracts. That all worked well, didn't
it? Yeah, 100%. How's things your end?
You don't follow the contract. You just need high enough consequences. It's like this, calculation. This other podcast, Scott Galloway, this podcaster I listen to, talks about the algebra of deterrence, right? Where as long as the likelihood of getting caught times the cost of getting caught equals a number bigger than the gain, then it'll keep people in line. So if the likelihood of getting caught in the mafia system is 0.1%, but the consequence is you get shot and put in a river, then you have to weigh that up against whether you're going to make an extra 100K on doing the dirty on a contract. So I think just rather than all these contracts
capital punishment.
Yeah. I think if the consequences are high enough, that's all you really need.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a stressful world at all.
No, it definitely would be stressful. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
So today we are talking about some news in the last handful of weeks where a relatively new software company called Ingenious.build, which is an American SaaS platform for construction and real estate, has just secured a $37 million US funding round, a Series A funding round, which is a decent chunk. That'll get you a lot of office lattes, yoga chairs, bean bags. We haven't got any bean bags yet. So this company they've raised the money to advance their platform. I would say they're like a direct competitor to, say, a Procore. Their customers sit across real estate development and construction contractors. So they're both client side and contractor side. Their main value proposition of the area they operate is around the commercial management, project financials, contract administration. And there is definitely a lot of things in that space that could be improved. I'd say the broader issue of contract management is that there are companies that do lots of things in spreadsheets. There are other companies that have a platform to do the whole thing, but all of it, from my experience, is to some degree still very manual and clunky. So I thought we could dive into the topic of, off the back of this news, dive into the topic of how contract management and cost value management and procurement is typically done on large infrastructure and building contract projects around the world. What do you reckon?
It's good to see a decent looking product in the space. I don't know if you've seen any of the old sort of commercial tools, but they're pretty old school. But their content, a little bit of a gripe. It's really hard to see what it actually does. There's some pretty broad categories. We sell productivity and we give you insight across contract management and forecasting. It's cool. Is that Is that all you're going to give us? But
Yeah.
yeah,
It
it looks
makes
like
you
it's in the
wonder
right
whether
space.
the steak is as good as the sizzle.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, trying to dig into a bit. It looks like it's covering the right spaces. I'd love to see it in more detail. They got pretty impressive revenue and obviously valuation in line with that raise, so it must be popular. And yeah, outside of Procore, I can't think of another major one. Like the well known commercial sort of system is Coins, but that's really more to do with things like payments and yeah, other bits and pieces.
So it'd be good to just like stepping back and pretending I'm a dummy. You might not actually need to pretend, but if you pretend I'm a dummy in the world of commercial and commercial management of a large infrastructure project, if we step through like what I imagine, if I sort of paint the picture and then you tell me whether it's like right or wrong, and we can dive into it. That like there's some element of building up packages. So you get a contract, you've got to build up packages for different subcontractors to kind of let out. You go and get pricing and they come back and then you select and award a contract to them. And then there's some matching of like that versus like what a budget was involved in that process to work out whether you're winning or losing on the whole thing. And then as the sort of time goes on, there's sort of maybe two processes. There's like work gets performed. So there's like an invoicing and working out costs and where cost is going to end up. And then there's this other thing around change where maybe there's change that is between you and a subcontractor. And then there's probably change with you and like a client if you're a general contractor. Are there any other like bits to that whole puzzle that I've kind of missed in there?
Yeah, so I think let's put aside change for just 5 minutes because that's the thing that actually adds the complexity in reality.
Yep.
So we've got the foundational stuff which you mentioned. So you've got this original sort of budget that you won the job with, and that's like that could be a bill of quantities, so like first principles. And then you go through this process of going like, right, this stuff sits well together, so I'm going to bundle that up and call it a package, and we're going to go to market and procure, either decide to self-deliver or to procure it through the supply chain. So that all gets divvied up. So you kind of got your prelims, which is your staff, your office, and that sort of stuff. And then you've got your packages, and then all of that sort of adds up to a number, which then you apply some fee and some overheads and things like that. You're then procuring packages. So large jobs, smaller jobs, the QS would just do it. In Australia, obviously, the engineer would probably do it. Large jobs, you would just have a procurement team because they're churning out like 100 packages on a major job in a short period of time. Mm-hmm. You've then obviously got contract negotiation with each of those, and you're trying to get it as back-to-back as possible with your own contract, so it doesn't leave you at shitty situations. And then you ultimately have a budget that you're letting works against. And ideally, immediately, you're making some sort of return because you're able to procure the works at a lesser value than you secured in the tender with the ultimate sort of client. You've let these subcontract packages. One part of commercial is really the sort of, it's called kind of comms and document control. I wouldn't say that's a commercial only thing, but you need like an Aconex or like a CMAR to make sure you're doing contractual communications.
Other software is available. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So I think like this Ingenious app, they do cover that. That's a bit punchy because most of these tools are dictated by the client. And then you're tracking actual cost. Most of that comes from records. So it could be site diaries, could be swipes. You obviously get payment applications from the subcontractor, but you've got to validate what they're asking for against completed tasks and spend. So each of those subcontract packages, each month, you're going through that valuation process. That whole process, from what I saw, that's all on spreadsheets. The procurement part in particular, there's like ProcurePro and other people that we've spoken about that they're starting to make waves there.
Yeah, that's a really useful kind of like map of the process. And what would be, and like if I'm a contractor, many of those things seem very tightly connected to the previous thing or the thing following, or the step before or step after. And so I'm going to desperately want to have those, whether it's all in one system or there's multiple, but they're connected in a way. I guess I'd be agnostic too, because I am like an advocate for best in class tools to a degree.
Yep.
But it'd be good if you could cast your mind back in a few years and you're managing QS on an infrastructure project in the UK. What is the reality of how that looks? Like, is it one tool? Are there multiple tools? Are they connected together? What does it look like?
When you're procuring works, it's just a spreadsheet, and it'll be the spreadsheet from whoever the procurement lead is from their last job, right?
Right.
So you just bang in some information, send it out, and you might have an app which manages the sort of back and forth part of the anonymous tender to win the works. Any quotes to the client for any sort of contract change, spreadsheet, like awful kind of spreadsheet. If you are receiving a quote from the supply chain, you basically look at the numbers and you go, oh, that one looks high. And then you might ask a few people and you might check what people previously paid. And that's really all you had to work with because there was no system to go in and see market rates for things. Actual cost is loose. Like I remember assessing like a piece of change, and I would have a stack of maybe like 100 allocation sheets and diaries from the supply chain member and the engineer. And like half of them were blank, half of them weren't signed. Some of them you couldn't even read, and there was coffee spilt on them, and like nightmare. So you kind of have to look at what a typical week looks like, base that, and look at the others.
So maybe I should have flipped the question. Are there any parts of it that are in a system or connected to the other parts, or is it literally just a spreadsheet goes to a spreadsheet, goes to a spreadsheet, goes to another spreadsheet?
Comms and document control is the only like commonly digitized part. So all your contracts, communication, which obviously isn't just commercial, but it's important in commercial because you have timelines related to every type of communication. So like if the client says like, give us a price for this or instructs you, you've got a time to respond with a quote, and they've got a time to accept the quote and things like that. I actually text a friend a couple of days ago. He's a senior commercial director at one of the big 10 contractors. And I was like, man, I just want to check that I'm not out of touch now because I'm running an episode on commercial management. Are you guys using apps for everything yet? He said, yeah, we're in this transition, and by next year, we'll start to use Power BI for reporting. No apps to actually do it. So, they're looking at apps to automate. Yeah. So
the output. Okay.
Yeah.
So you said before this idea of like, okay, you said put change aside because that's the thing that makes it complicated. But it sounds like well, there's tons of running room to make this. Taking up all the packages, doing the procurement step of the packages, and we spoke to Al the other week where they're like nailing that. But then there's this piece of, okay, we've got these contracts, they're being delivered, costs are coming in. They're, so it sounds like there's like a PDF sent through of the costs and someone's manually typing that into some spreadsheet. And then that's kind of getting maybe incorrectly entered, and there's all sorts of problems in there. So it seems like some way to systemize that has got tons of running room. Just diving into change. So as you said, change makes it way more difficult. And I'm imagining things like design and construct amp up the difficulty even more to a degree. What's good look like, or what's the state of play when we're on a sort of large infrastructure project? We've got some change occurring. That change may be, say, client initiated or impacting us upstream, and then impacting us with a number of partners downstream. What does that actual like process look like?
Yeah, so I guess
in managing a single piece of change.
Yeah, so I guess to paint a picture, like client issue is a variation, so it'll change or whatever they call it. Every contract type has it; they just have different names for it.
Yep.
So a change QS or the commercial manager receives this instruction effectively, looks at the instruction, it goes, cool, like how does that affect scope? And they'll start checking works information and documents and drawings and everything to try and piece together what they think that sort of variation means. So they start to pull together a quote. Say, right, we've got this instruction from you, so this is what it's going to cost. And they'll also work with the planner to work.
But before we do that, don't you need to like go and do it? Don't you need to like tell the supply? Don't you need to tell supply chain? Does people on site need to know about this change?
No, so there's two ways you manage it. One, they just do the quote on a forecast. And one, they do it retrospectively based on prices from the supply chain. Once you know prices from the supply chain, you can't do the forecast because you're aware of that price. So you've got these two choices. Do we try and win on a forecast, or do we actually go and find out what the cost is and then use that to substantiate the claim? But there's a risk that if you do the forecast version, you can't actually get the price that you forecast with the supply chain. So it can be one of those two. But there's this one individual that's typically managing that and trying to work out And yes, major subcontractors, they'll probably go and ask for a quote for their element of the works to make sure it's back to back, because you don't want to take the risk on.
But at this point, is like the
undercooking it.
work already done on site, or are they still waiting for this process to happen before the work's done on site?
Let's assume they're doing it correctly, which is we're going to instruct you to do something.
Yeah, because I was testing whether you were going to lie or not, because there is 0% chance that the construction team are waiting for this whole thing to happen. But yeah.
No, let's assume like dream world, where the first time we know about this work is when we get an instruction and it's not already been built, and we're retrospectively working out. Okay. And in that example, by the way, you then go to actual cost. So if it's a retrospective instruction, you have to, it's just what the cost was plus fee. So the commercial manager takes this and they're going, cool, right, this is going to affect these packages. So I'm going to let the QS know on those packages that we've got this change. And those QSs then have to go and instruct their supply chain members. Okay. So they've sort of divvied up the scope. There's no real check to know if that was fully divvied up and it's all completely covered.
Yep.
And you need to make sure there's no ambiguity between the downstream instructions. So like one instruction from the client could mean 5 instructions below, for example.
Yeah. And to be clear, they're probably 2 different systems. So you get the instruction on some system and then the downstreams in a different one.
I've never been on a project where they're the same.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
You've then got QSs instructing and negotiating price, right? The upstream commercial manager could already have agreed a price and locked it down. And then the QS below has agreed a price that's higher and you're already losing. These are kind of working independently. Yeah, so nothing really sort of matches from that point of view.
And you've got this, I'm imagining you've got this timeline where you've got supply chain responding on some random time frame, some quick, some slow.
Yeah.
And you've got your head contract notification period where you've got to respond on some time frame.
Yeah, and like certain instructions, some of the works might be way down the line. You haven't even procured a package for it yet. It's just sat there as a budget, right? So
yeah,
what we don't have is a view of the commercial manager going, here's all that cost that's being distributed down. And the guys at the bottom don't know what the quote looks like going upstream. You'd think that they would all review, but when you've got 500 instructions above and 10,000 below, no one actually knows.
Yeah. In reality, what's this look like on a project? You've got one system and you've got all these people that are like QSs managing downstream packages, sending letters to the supply chain, chasing them. Why haven't you responded to this? And they've probably got spreadsheets with registers of all the like changes, and they're manually updating spreadsheets in those registers of they have responded to this one, they haven't responded to that one. And then presumably like at no point is any of this really agreed, because you're always waiting for the thing to be agreed upstream before you can agree to things downstream.
If you're instructed upstream, so you're instructed by the client to do something, you have to do it. You can't wait until you've agreed the quote. So what you'll see is there'll be hundreds of these unagreed quotations are tied to instructions that you have to start because they've told you to.
And you've got the same deal going downstream?
Yeah, but typically subcontractors would be much more on it because they want to agree their change and they're giving you pressure to actually get things agreed. So you're normally more sort of defined downstream than upstream. So your cost is a little more certain than your budget.
So I want to ask you the question, like, you know, in the context of this, the company, like the Ingenious.build raise and just talking about commercial management. And you said right at the start, put change aside because it makes everything hard. It does feel like there's the procurement piece, which is one whole piece, which is go out, let the packages, bring them back in, work out where your position is, which like a platform that does procurement, that covers like that bit. It does feel like to me, there's literally 3 pieces to this whole thing. There's a procurement piece, there's a getting cost in and working out where you sit on cost each month or whatever cycle it is. And then there's some change package management piece. Would you, if you were to break up the sort of parts of, you know, what needs to be systemized, is it those 3 bits, or is there something else in there?
Yeah, for sure. The change management piece is definitely the part that I don't think has been served properly. Like you have systems and it looks like Ingenious does it where it says, this is your budget and this is what you're going to spend, and one minus the other is profit or loss. So there's loads of systems that do that. There's the contract management side. There's loads of systems to do that. And it's really hard to like build an all-in-one because the client are going to dictate that at the end of the day. So you can't just use a full system. And the procurement side is quite a defined thing. It's its own little silo. Like it's all pre-contract really. So it's a nice stepping point.
But the platform yeah, you've got this. Sorry to cut you off, by the way, but you've got this like platform piece where you've got the two bits I described in the bottom, which is like we're kind of doing some forecasting each month. We're getting cost in. That cost is propagating into a system. It does feel like that system is super tightly connected to the change one, or would you think that they're somewhat separate?
They should be connected, but they're currently very separate. So, like on our projects, the cost and value reconciliation, which is our sort of profit and loss
Monthly
type of
forecasting
situation,
cycle type of thing. Yeah,
is separate to your like bottom up forecast, which is what are we going to spend, because that's its own
oh right.
individual beast. And it's very difficult to tie the two together without like a system that is specifically built to do that.
Yeah, because it does feel like that the Genius thing does sit on the like procurement that goes into a table. You see, total budget and what the package value is, and the hard bit is still like kind of unsolved. And like I know, well, you're the right person to talk to, because I know right at the start, before kind of Aphex got off the ground, you had this idea for a piece of software in this space. Where was it sitting in? Without disclosing too much, what was the kind of core idea that improves some of it?
This is back when I was naive. I was like, oh, we'll just do the planning tool in year one and then we'll build the commercial tool. That'll be easy.
Yeah. Like 27 years in, we're still building the planning tool.
Yeah. So it's kind of sits within that, the cost and the cost and value sort of space. So the CVR thing that I mentioned, as well as the forecasting forward.
Yep.
And really, it's not that complicated, but I was imagining in a world where like you get instructed something, the person who's in charge of that instruction, they start putting together a quote. As part of that, you're like tagging the packages that they're part of and the coding structure. So you're building this thing. The package managers are being notified that, hey, you like this part of this quote is your package. So it's like steps down in a nice structured way. And then when they start building their quote, they see the live budget that they've got. And when they're building their quote too, the person at the top also sees what this cost is in real time. So like the two are inherently linked. And then when you're doing your forecast, you've got spend against each one of them, each variation, as well as the contract works too. So you've got all three things in one space then. And that sounds simple, but it's like some would say that's a niche thing to build, but it's a problem that's on every major scheme.
It doesn't seem actually like that technically complicated. Not saying that we should stop building the planning thing and go and do this thing, but it does feel like, other than potentially integration at the like cost side of things, like to get the cost in, and then integration with the procurement side to like propagate the packages from there.
Yeah. Because if you think
contract values and stuff,
what I've just described with like a variation from the client and then everything tied in below, you've also got like the original bill of quantities with the subcontract packages. So everything steps down all the way. But then when you actually start to think about it, you go, oh, fuck. Then you'd have like live like exchange rates and material prices. And then you'd want actual cost feeding in from swipes to show actual cost. And suddenly you would obviously be able to blow that up into something pretty mega. But that core thing in the middle hasn't been done. There's a lot of systems that do the stuff around it. Yeah.
So if you were to take top 10 contractors in, say, UK, how many of them, like, what is the state of play for that process for them?
Spreadsheets.
From what you know, it's still, you reckon still all spreadsheets?
Yeah.
I know Oz, some parts of that, even when I was, when I was, I guess, on the tools, that we had some like internally built, and it did like a single bit of it. It was like you would do a bit of it in this system, then you'd have some spreadsheets, and then there'd be another system. Everything was kind of tacked together with an export manual spreadsheet bit import into this other thing.
Yeah. Like people do it, but they're making do, right? So even if you had systems that did some of the things that we know exist in the market, it's still human intervention and import from this thing, put it in a spreadsheet, do some work and punch it out. And it's the risk of gaps and ambiguities and double bubbling. Like certainty's terrible. Yeah, from what I've seen, no one's done it. I think maybe people would assume that it's a niche problem, but it's not. It's a problem on everything, on every major scheme.
Yeah.
So,
And so that's really the pitch, right? So the takeaway is anyone listening that wants to be the fun Carlos into building this.
I'll take a percent. I'll give you the idea and let me know how it goes.
Okay, yeah. Or if they want to kick a royalty to him or some advisory shares, he's open to it. But I think it is like one of those things where someone needs to have been deeply probably involved in that process too, because there'll be all sorts of things, right? There'll be bits where you want to put cost in at the bottom level from the supply chain, but then you also want the ability to have stuff that's in there that's hidden because you probably want to.
Yeah,
there's certain bits that you want to show, certain bits you want to hide, certain bits you want to pass up, some bits you want to keep to yourself. So there's all that.
like
kind of like contingency management.
And there's going to be views and permissions related to the client and the supply chain and the buyers and the project director. So
anyone that wants to, Carlos will do advisory shares or direct funding either.
I said to my boss on the last job that I did, like, this is a fucking nightmare. Can we get a tool for it? He just went, if you find a tool, I'll pay for it, because he knew like fully well it didn't exist. So that was part of the where it came from.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like even Ingenious.build or even Procore, the change management piece is still it's not to that level of sophistication.
No. And just to be clear, they do a lot of stuff. Like, they will track the original budget. They will have a change tracker. They'll have subcontractor change trackers. But the clever thing of saying profit and loss by CE or variation, and
they're not really. It's still quite manual.
Yeah, exactly. So
So I guess moral of the story, key takeaway of the episode and the discussion is, once again, construction is a series of disconnected software tools held together by people exporting data, massaging it in a spreadsheet, and then jamming it back into another system. So big surprise to nobody. That's the. But
they do plug it into Power BI, so we're moving forward.
And then it is in Power BI, so that at the end of the day, someone gets a chart. There's about 400 people putting fake data into a system so that some management head honcho can look at it and go, "What a system! I can see exactly where all the projects are."
Yeah, I get regular messages from a very senior commercial director saying, "Have you built that tool yet?" So now he's going to listen to this episode.
There we go. So Carlos is bringing advice and your first customer. You're bringing advice and your first customer. So I think someone needs to pick this up and run with it.
Yeah.
Cool, mate. I think we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Once again, if you do like what we've covered or don't, tell us about it. The feedback that we get really helps shape the things that are interesting in the way that we talk about topics. We do this because it is a conversation that we would have had anyway, unrecorded. It's a conversation that helps us think about, stick the head above the fray for a little bit of time every week. Think about things that are happening outside of the day job, and hopefully that's interesting to other people. So the people that send us feedback, thank you very much. It's super, super valuable. And see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.